And welcome everyone to another edition of Krown Gridiron Nation on TSN. Mike is in mourning in Toronto. Gord is in Vancouver, and I'm Jim on Football Island, getting ready to bring you another 2-minute offense. Ohio doubling up on Buffalo 20-10. Curtis Rourke with a low-profile day, 14 of 21 for 121. Christian Bayer still trying to find his way as the man running the pit offense, 13 of 22 for 161, one pick, one TD, and a loss to Syracuse. Alec Manor with another plus 100-yard day, 122 clicks to be precise, and a TD, but Oregon State was all over Stanford. The pride of Kelowna, BC, Nolan Ulm finds his way to the end zone, but it wasn't enough for Eastern Washington against Montana State. Keelan White, this kid from the North Shore in BC, is flying high. 69 yards and receptions, led every receiver on the field in Montana's win over Portland State. We've talked about individual Canadian players in the NCAA all through the year, but we really haven't zeroed in yet on the race for the Cornish Trophy. Gord, who are your three leaders right now in terms of the Cornish Trophy?
Well, I think the reason we haven't necessarily talked a lot about it is we've been hoping for more superlative performances to come out of the NCAA ranks for us to talk about. And at this point in time, forget a top three. It's kind of a top one for me right now, and it's Alec Manor leading the charge. You know, he's really taken the lead role in the Stanford offense, and a Stanford offense for which there hasn't really been much else going on, right? And that's probably been his biggest challenge, is that his team has been largely irrelevant. He's very fortunate that his best game of the year came on that national stage against Colorado, but he's been the one guy that has put up superlative performances on high-profile stages with the counting stats to support it and the buzz behind him. And so right now, he looks like the complete package and a guy who's pulling away from the pack. The only other guy that I think at this point in time merits some serious consideration is Jeff Cantin-Arcou with Memphis. Okay, and it is we've talked a few times on the show about whether a defensive guy can win this award and who he might be talking about. Well, Cantin-Arcou is a guy that has put up the types of numbers that definitely put him squarely in that conversation. Now, I think back to Eamon Ogbongbemiga a few years ago, had similar counting stats, and there's an argument even that he maybe should have won the award and did not. That's the bar for Cantin-Arcou to hit. He's going to have to pick up his socks a little bit to get to that point. Right now, he's sitting at 61 total tackles, 2 forced fumbles, an interception, 1 sack. If he can add a couple more of those juicy splash plays to the resume, then we might be able to talk about him more seriously. But for me right now, it's Manor pulling away from the pack. Cantin-Arcou is a clear second. And then kind of by default, Curtis Rourke is the third.
Yeah, and I'll talk about those guys sort of in the inverse order that you gave them. And I think at one point we were starting to do the engraving on the Cornish Trophy for Rourke. And the last 4 games have not gone well. Maybe one of the 3 was okay, but 2 of the 4 were both under 200 yards. He was sacked twice in one game. He was intercepted 3 in the other. And, you know, we thought there was a chance that they were going to walk away with the MAC, and it just didn't happen. So he may have played his way out, especially a quarterback. When you've played 9 games and have 10 touchdown passes and 5 picks, those are not Cornish-worthy. Cantin-Arcou's been dynamite, and he's been fairly consistent. But last weekend, in the overtime win over Charlotte, he had 12 tackles. I mean, he was fantastic, and pick and the INT. So he's been really steady, but is capable of having those flash games like he had last week. But you know, when Ogbongbemiga was the guy, and I was going to bring him up as well, he had 100 tackles. Right? Like this, Cantin-Arcou's not going to get there. And with Manor, Alec's had a great year, and he had that big game against Stanford where everybody kind of fell in love, or against Colorado, where everybody fell in love with him. He was 300 yards almost. But after that, he's been great. Like, he's had a couple of 100-yard games. He's had another 90-yard game. He's been really good since that point. And he's flirting with 1,000 yards. And right now, season's not over, but I'm leaning very heavily toward him for the Cornish.
Gord, is it time that we dug a little deeper, maybe looked at offensive linemen, maybe looked at defensive linemen that draw double teams, that don't get those sexy stats that we like to talk about on a show like this?
Yeah, I mean, we probably should, right? I alluded to it a few times, but counting stats kind of dictate this thing in a lot of cases, and that leaves out a whole subsection of players on the field who are making significant impacts. Daniel Okpoko, for example, has been a stalwart on the front for the San Diego State defense, eating up a lot of blocks, has made some splash plays, but the overall stats aren't really standing out because he's a guy that, kind of like Neville Gallimore when he was in college and is in the pros, his impact is measured in things that don't necessarily turn into counting stats. And then, of course, that's true for everything offensive linemen do. I mean, there's lots of options around. Daniel Johnson, starting at left tackle for Purdue right now, is playing really well. Rusty Stats, a guy who's a small C Canadian, transferred from Western Kentucky after being All-CUSA, moved over to Texas Tech. He's had a very good season. A likely chance in the NFL awaits him. Jeremy James at Ole Miss we've talked about. You name it, on and on and on. There's been a number of Canadian performers on the offensive line that just kind of get overlooked for a multitude of reasons, one being the stats thing. The other, unfortunately, guys, this is a bit of a trend too, we were talking about off air. A lot of these guys are on teams that are not having great seasons right now. Even Texas Tech is 5-5 right now, right? And then it's a very middling season for them. So that's been a bit of a challenge in a lot of ways as well.
And historically, that's been the way, right? Offensive linemen have their own trophy. So you usually don't take a look at them, to win an MVP. Rarely happens, even with a team as opposed to a league, or in this case, looking at the entire NCAA. Bergeron at Syracuse last year had a hell of a year, and we didn't talk about him very seriously. There were probably other better candidates who splashed a little bit more and were able to put up better statistics. But yeah, I agree. The guys in the trenches rarely get their due. Maybe we should do a lineman version of the Cornish Award.
Yeah, Jim, you sponsored the Cornish Award. Maybe I'll sponsor the Mandarich Award, and we can actually have a separate trophy for linemen.
Well, let's see, of all the names we mentioned, who would make it into our stateside five. In at 5, Keelan White from North Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada, led all receivers in Montana's 24-point win over Portland State, 69 yards receiving. Number 4, Nolan Alm bounced back with a good performance for Eastern Washington. 4 receptions, 82 yards, and a TD, although the Eagles were crushed by Montana State. The pride of Medicine Hat, Alberta, and boy, have they got a lot to be proud of in Ellick A.O. Manor. 3 grabs, 122 yards, and a trip to the promised land. We will look the other way on the scoreboard in Corvallis. It's UNLV and Mississauga defensive back Jet Elad with his second game with 8 tackles and a pass breakup. And in at 1 for the 3rd time this year, Jeffrey Kenton Arcou. The linebacker from Lévis, Quebec, was at the epicenter of the Memphis attack in Charlotte. 12 tackles, a sack, a pass breakup, and an INT. Coming up, it's not what you expect out of the Power 7. Seven major games of note across Canada, so we've got a little bit of a different twist for you in this week's Power 7. In at 7, the Eastern Final. Chad Kelly baked up turnovers, delivered fresh to the end zone, and our Mike Hogan lost his appetite. In at 6, the Dunsmore Cup. This game gave rock fights a bad name, more like a giant boulder that wiped out a village of grass huts. Montreal 12, Laval 6, and the only TD was on defense. It's the Loney Bowl at 5. X got control early. They never looked back at Bishops in this one, and Gary Waterman gets his 3rd consecutive AUS Championship. Let's go back to the CFL in the Western Final because the Blue Bombers played the complete football game en route to their 4th straight appearance in the Coupe Grey. In at 3, it's the CJFL Canadian Bowl. It was in Victoria, and it followed the script of the 2019 game that was also played in BC. The Saskatoon Hilltops grind out another championship. Speaking of scripts, the Yates Cup in at 2. Western follows the 2023 script. Unspectacular by halftime, but they are consistent finishers in the second half. The Mustangs' ground game dominates Laurier. And in at 1, it is the Hardy Cup. Just like the 2023 season for UBC, but they packed it all into a single championship game. A great start, an inconsistent middle, and then at the end, the Alberta Golden Bears team finishes second fiddle to the Birds with some spectacular play at the end. Now, before we roll through all of these games, I want to bring up a point that was driving me crazy on Saturday. You've got 7 games with significant overlap that are all championship games or bowl games or qualifying for the Grey Cup. They're all happening at the same time. There was an hour in BC where the Canadian Bowl in Victoria, the Hardy Cup in Vancouver, and the BC Lions were all playing at the same time. How do we sort this out on Saturdays if there's going to be this crossroad of high-profile games all happening at the same time, Mike?
Well, you would know better than I, as the Football Canada poobah, that sometimes communications isn't exactly the greatest thing, and each league is looking after its own, or each brand of football is looking after itself. The CFL wanted to get away from Sunday competition with the NFL, so it's okay. Let's try this, and actually went to the fans. Randy Ambrosi, when he was doing his cross-country tour, would ask in every stop, every market, would you like to see the Saturday games? And the overwhelming response from fans was yes. And I don't think there was too much negotiation between the CFL and U Sports and junior football. Hey, can we have this work so everybody's happy? I kind of think you're damned if you do, damned if you don't. But I think each league is going to look after its own best interests. And right now in this country, by far, with the money involved, the CFL is the top dog. And I don't think it's going to play nice in the sandbox right now with U Sports. I don't think there's a great relationship there right now. Likewise with junior. Maybe it's time to sit down and try and figure this thing out. But yeah, it's tough when you're a diehard fan of multiple leagues. Sometimes you get lost in the wash, and preparing for the CFL game. The games that I wanted to watch were on in the background, and then when we kicked off, couldn't watch the end of them. So. A little bit of catch up after the game, our game was over. So I don't know if there is a perfect solution to this, but sometimes fans just kind of, you got to pick your poison.
Yeah, and I would say the gate numbers at the CFL for the CFL playoff games so far have kind of backed up that notion that the Saturdays are probably working well for them. But I will say, I agree with you, Jim. This is an issue. Maybe they just need to space out the start times on the Saturday a little bit better. But you're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place, right? Part of me wants to say, well, why doesn't the Canada West that leans into Friday nights throughout the regular season also just have the Hardy Cup on a Friday night? It'll be the standalone game, all that kind of stuff. Well, now you're stepping on the toes of high school football that are also in their playoff season. You get a lot of officials that cross over, you name it, right? You get into Saturday, you're dealing with the CFL now. You're also dealing with Hockey Night in Canada. You have issues finding a window there. And then you get into Sunday, and now you're dealing with the NFL, the giant of all giants when it comes to sports and football in particular in this continent. So I will give them a little bit of amnesty in that. I don't know that there's an easy answer here. They're going to have to get creative. But I mean, it's, as always, it's an issue of alignment, right? And in this country, that just seems to constantly be the refrain, is that there is zero alignment at any different level between any of these different entities to get things on the right path and have a united front. Look at the way, I go back to hockey, look at the way Hockey Canada aligns so much of what it does from bottom to top. That's what needs to happen in this country, and it's just not right now.
Now, let's switch gears for a bit here, guys, because a lot of these games followed form. Even the Canadian Bowl that I was at between the Saskatoon Hilltops and the West Shore Rebels, that was almost a duplication of when Saskatoon won a championship out here a couple of years ago against the Langley Rams. So what about these games following form?
Well, pretty much. I mean, we talked about the Dunsmore and how it was going to be a rock fight, and I think last week I said the first team to 17 is going to win, not realizing that the total score would be 18. We talked about the lack of offensive touchdowns in that series in a lot of games, and there were none. There was a defensive touchdown, there was a safety, there were 3 field goals under 40 yards. I mean, it followed the script that we've seen so many times between Laval and Montreal, and the better team won. So, I don't think anybody should have been surprised by that game.
No, I don't think so. I think both you and I alluded to it on last week's program. I was hopeful that there might have been a little bit more entertainment value. And I mean, this has been the challenge for these two programs in the RSEQ over the last number of years, is that at least in conference play, the entertainment value is often just really minimal with the games that they play between them. Obviously, the stakes are high. Obviously, there's talent on the field. But man, like watching, it was a 12-5 final or whatever the heck it was, like that's just eye-gouging stuff. We've seen when they've gotten to the Vanier Cup level that they can open it up and there can be fireworks. We've seen both these teams get into the high 20s, the 30s, no problem when they're playing a team on the other side that also plays offensively oriented football. They kind of chameleon into it. I just wish that would be a little bit more of their ethos on a regular basis than that. And in terms of talking about following script, the Loney Bowl follows script. My upset specials from last week's program, I hope to goodness that nobody bet on those, because neither of them were particularly close. And I think it was a 34-23 final in the Lonely Bowl. It wasn't as close as that score would indicate. Like St. FX had that in hand after 3 quarters, and I think Bishops got 10 points in the 4th quarter to make it a little bit more respectful looking. But that's about it. And what was most impressive for FX is that they controlled this game from beginning to end without the services of Malcolm Bussey, the AUS MVP, and the guy that's really driven their offense this year. So that'll be a big storyline for them as they come out west to Vancouver for the semifinal this upcoming weekend, is what's the status of Bussey, because they're going to be up against it anyway. But there's nothing saying that they can't take a really good crack at it and have a good competitive shot here if they have everybody healthy. But I don't think that they're built to be able to withstand the loss of a guy like that and also take on a UBC program that's going to be probably next level from most of what they've seen this year.
And when the Yates Cup was, we talked about the script as well, and Laurier followed it to a T. They got out to a 2-score lead early, and they did what they had to do. They kept Western, had a 1st and goal. They stopped them 3rd and 1 from the 1-yard line. They held them to 4 short field goals, the 2-score lead. And then what did Western do? Exactly what we talked about a week ago. They get the interception to kind of put Laurier behind it, and then the dagger, a 51-yard pass, Hillock to Robertson, and from there on in, it's all Western. So, both teams kind of followed the script. Laurier did what it had to do until Western did what it does. So they followed the script as well. So, maybe the one that had a little bit of drama was the one out west.
Yeah, it was. And quickly on the Yates, like Western's defense was fantastic in that game over the last 3 quarters of that game. And you see 2 different Western running backs go over 100 yards. That is the script for Western. It was a prototypical Western game. Out west, I got to be honest, like I messaged multiple people after the first 5 minutes of this game, and I went, "Woof, UBC is going to win this thing by at least 20." Like UBC looked like they were ready to blow the doors off Alberta. They looked like they were ready for everything Alberta had when Alberta had the ball. Their offense looked like Alberta had no answers for it. On their first touchdown drive, Garrett Rooker's finding receivers wide open all over the field. Like, it is not competitive. The only contested play on the entire drive ended up being a pass interference call for early contact. Like, that was it. It looked like UBC was going to have their way with them. And then all of a sudden, UBC, they also have a turnover. They add another 7 right after that. And then all of a sudden, they hit the skids a little bit, and Alberta claws right back. And you're sitting there at halftime going, Alberta has the lead right now? Like, what happened? And the second half was just kind of, it felt like UBC just couldn't get anything going again and again and again, and Alberta could not quite put them away with that key major to really end things. But it looked like Alberta they picked off Rooker. They were driving into UBC's territory. They were comfortably in field goal range, less than a minute left. And Eli Hetlinger coughs up the ball on a broken play on 2nd and 4. He turns one way. His running back, the backup running back, I should point out, goes the other way. He panics and scrambles, loses the ball. UBC turns it over. Okay, fine. They've got 95 yards to go. 52 seconds on the clock. Their offense hasn't put up that much offense in the entire second half to this point. And what does UBC do? Pulls 95 yards out of their tail, including on the very first play, almost 70 yards over the top. An incredible finish with the added drama of the fact that when UBC does score the touchdown to Sam Davenport with 0 seconds on the clock, they take a penalty and it backs up the PAT. So it's actually a legitimate PAT. I think it ended up being an almost 30-yard PAT kick, which still a fairly easy field goal, but ain't PAT easy. And the game is on the line, and Kieran Flannery Fleck right down Broadway. Could not have been more down the middle for the win. Fantastic finish to what was not a great second half and a good but not great game before that point.
Well, I've got to say this for all the folks out at SFU. It was nice to see Sam Davenport, the former Red Leaf, score that touchdown in that key moment. And he represented everybody for the team in red that no longer exists. When we come back, we will preview the bowl games in Canada. Stick around. And welcome back to Gridiron Nation, everyone. 2 big games to get in to the Vanier Cup on the 25th of November. They are coming up this Saturday. The Mitchell Bowl and the UTEC Bowl. The Mitchell Bowl way out on the coast for the first time since 1997, I want to say, with UBC hosting X. Let's start with that one, Mike.
Well, hey, it's going to be tough for X to make that long trip. That's not an easy one to a school that's not used to making long trips during the course of the season. I think on paper this looks like a mismatch. We've talked about the conference strength all year long, but let's look at it this way. If X plays as well as it did over the weekend when it beat Bishops, and if UBC plays as poorly as it did in the loss to Calgary, then UBC might only win by 5 touchdowns. So, we can look at it that way. I really don't want that to happen. It's the 3 guys on this side of the camera and everybody who works behind it all want the conferences to be more even. We can't wait till we eat crow. I would like nothing more than for X to head out west, make that long trip, and shut everybody in the country up. I just don't see it happening. I hope I'm wrong. I hope it's a competitive game, but if UBC shows up, I don't think it will be close.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to be as blunt as you were there, Mike, but I think one of the big issues for FX coming out here is the status of Malcolm Bussey. With that being up in the air, that's a huge problem for a team that can't necessarily afford to absorb that kind of a blow in this situation. So I hope for their sake that he's okay because, they were able to absorb it well enough against Bishops. They were still able to run the ball effectively with the backups. Silas Fignon was really good through the air as well. But if he's not there for them, that's just about any hope that they really have, in my opinion. And I'm hopeful, like I said, at least that they are able to be at full strength and give it a real legitimate shot here. As far as UBC, UBC's been pretty mercurial for the last month and a half, guys. You don't really know what to expect from them. And even within the same game, they look like they could be one of the best teams in the country, and they look like anybody could beat them at different points in the same game. And it feels like they're really hot and cold. Their offense in particular, I got really frustrated in the second half watching their offense because I felt like they abandoned the ground game and didn't make use of what I think is one of the best running backs in the country in Isaiah Knight effectively at all in the second half of that. They reverted to trying to be an aerial attack. I don't expect them to make that mistake this week. I expect that you'll see them establish the ground game early and often. And if they don't have to throw much, I don't think that they're ever going to. They have a really experienced, deep, and talented offensive line. They have Knight. They love Garrett Rooker, and he's a great talent himself. Don't get me wrong. But I don't think that they're going to get too crazy with things if they don't need to. I expect it'll be a very run-heavy attack on the offensive side for UBC this week, and I expect that that's probably all that they're going to need.
Okay, there's not much more to say about the Mitchell Bowl. Let's switch gears to the UTEC Bowl between Montreal and Western, and it will be played at Sepsum in Montreal. Will that be enough of a difference to tilt this thing slightly in the Carabins' way? Gord.
I mean, it might be. What I think Western's going to need to do is really pour over that Dunsmore Cup film and see what Laval did to really put the cap on this Montreal offense. It took Laval 3 tries to figure it out, but they did figure it out this past weekend. So if Western can figure out what they can do to match up to Montreal on that side of the ball, then I do actually like Western's chances quite a bit here, especially that defensive performance against Elgersma. You know, we like Jonathan Senecal a lot. I think I've been one of his most outspoken fans on this show, but I don't think that after facing Taylor Elgersma, you're super, super stressed out by Jonathan Senecal. Now, the one thing he does do differently is he's much more mobile than Elgersma. Western's going to have to figure out how to match that because they haven't necessarily faced a really mobile quarterback in a while. So they're going to have to figure out that counterpunch. But on the other side of the ball, I think Western, the run game is going to be critical for them as ever. But what we have seen from Western in the past number of years is that they are really, really good at scheming up their run game and putting their backs and offensive line, for that matter, in positions to succeed. I expect to see some really creative wrinkles and usage of an H-back in the offensive line game, in the run game, to open things up for them. If they can do that effectively, then that's the key for them on offense. Montreal's going to have to keep the clamps on them and then look for the over-the-shot splash play because that's what Western likes to do in the passing attack, is have Hillock put it over the top to one of those playmakers after they suck defenders in with an effective run game. So for Montreal, stopping the run and then keeping the top on things is kind of the focus for them when Western has the ball.
And that might be it. I mean, both teams have been able to run the ball over the course of the season, but both teams are exceptionally good at stopping the run. So I don't think we'll see, a 12-6 game like we saw last week in Quebec. But this might be a fairly low-scoring game. Will a team be able to run, Montreal can run the football and Western 200-yard games are the norm for them. Can they do that against Montreal? That's a pretty tall order. It might come down to, again, the big plays and whether or not Western can make them. Do I think they're more capable of stretching the field and hitting Robertson or Magne Jones downfield? Yeah, I do. But Montreal might be able to do the same thing, or they might take one of those deep shots and turn it into a touchdown the other way. So as Jim's opening question to you, Gord, was, is home field going to be enough? Excuse me. But if home field is worth a field goal in a playoff game, maybe that is enough. I just think this is going to be a tremendously close, entertaining football game.
Yeah, I agree. And you noted that both teams have been really good at stopping the run. One thing that tends to be a trend with that, though, is that quarterback run tends to break those rules, right? The teams that are good run stoppers are really good at fitting their gaps and filling on running backs more often than not. And then quarterback run can sometimes break those rules. If I'm Montreal's offensive coordinator, that's something that I'm looking to scheme up some wrinkles with, is design quarterback run. Another alternative would be, fly sweeps and things like that. But for me, design quarterback run could be something that tips the scales for Montreal. I still like Western in this game, but I think if Montreal is going to be successful when they have the ball, that might be the X factor for them.
This will be the closer of the 2 bowl games. I'll leave it at that.
Games of the week coming up next. games of the week on Gridiron Nation. What do you got for me, Gord?
Well, I got Rutgers going into Penn State. Wesley Bailey, Renee Conga on the Rutgers side, Theo Johnson and Malik Mega on the Penn State side. And guys, this is a matchup of two teams for whom the O disappeared last week. Rutgers gets shut out at Iowa entirely. Penn State only puts up 15 points and cans their offensive coordinator after playing a coachless Michigan. Both these teams need to bounce back on offense. Penn State in particular really needs to bounce back after what was a pretty bad beatdown on national TV against Michigan. Lots of intrigue here for me to look for.
I'll take a look at Air Force and UNLV. They're both 8-2. They're tied atop Mountain West with Fresno State. And, this is a huge game. And Jet Elad for UNLV from Mississauga had a really nice game. 8 tackles last week for the Rebels. And Gord pointed this out to me off air that this is the first chance UNLV has had for a 9-win game since 84, or 9-win season since 84, when their quarterback was Randall Cunningham, and they had a backup quarterback named Ickey Woods. And for Air Force, they've lost their last 2 games. They seem to have it under control and have actually not played well their last couple, including last week against Hawaii. So huge game, essentially for first place in the conference. So that's my game of the week.
For my other one, I've got SMU and the Tigers. And no, I'm not talking St. Mary's and Dalhousie. I'm talking Southern Methodist and Memphis. Memphis we talk about quite a bit on the show because of Jeff Cantanarku patrolling the middle of that Memphis defense. Both these teams are 8-2. They are at the top of the standings in the All-American Conference and in the driver's seat for spots in the conference championship game. So there's a lot on the line here because the winner of that championship game then gets to a very high-profile bowl game at the end of the year. Memphis has been really good this year under Coach Ryan Silverfield. SMU on the other side, though, Memphis just survived an upset bid to a Charlotte team that is not as good as this SMU team. They're going to need to be better than the week before if they're going to pull this one off. And given SMU's blueprint of being a high-shooting offensive team, this should be a really fun one as well.
So for everyone here on Krown Gridiron Nation, this is Jim Mullen saying, let's get out to the game.